Jerusalem. The Israeli military carried out its largest daytime airstrike campaign in Gaza since the 2014 war Saturday as Hamas militants fired dozens of rockets into Israel throughout the day, threatening to trigger an all-out war after weeks of growing tensions along the volatile border. 2 Palestinian teenagers were killed by an airstrike in Gaza City and 10 others injured, while 3 Israelis were wounded from a rocket that landed on a residential home. Smoke rises above buildings during an Israeli airstrike on Gaza City on Saturday. 2 Palestinian teens died and 10 other people were injured when an airstrike targeted an unfinished building in the city, Mahmoud Hams, AFP. Getty Images. Israel said it was focused on hitting militant targets and was warning Gaza civilians to keep their distance from certain sites. But even before the report of casualties, the intense tit-for-tat airstrikes and rocket barrages still marked a significant flare-up after a long period of a generally low-level, simmering conflict. Over 130 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli fire since ongoing protests dubbed the Great March of Return began on March 30. The Israeli army delivered its most painful strike against Hamas since the 2014 war, and we will increase the strength of our attacks as much as necessary, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said. Article continued below. Late Saturday, Hamas and Islamic Jihad militants in Gaza announced that they had agreed to a ceasefire brokered by Egypt, but sirens warning of incoming rockets still wailed in southern Israel early Sunday, and it was unclear if the ceasefire was holding. Lieutenant Col. Jonathan Conrick said the latest Israeli sortie, the third of the day, struck some 40 Hamas targets including tunnels, logistical centers and a Hamas battalion headquarters. He said the escalation was the result of the sustained Hamas rocket attacks, its fomenting of violence along the border and its campaign of launching incendiary kites and balloons that have devastated Israeli farmlands and nature reserves. Our message to Hamas is that we can and will enhance the intensity of our effort if needed, he said. What Hamas is doing is pushing them ever closer to the edge of the abyss. Hamas will have to understand that there is a price to be paid. Read more. 300 academics sign letter urging Trudeau to condemn Israel's use of force against Gazans. Medak, who saved lives, loses her own in Gaza. Deaths of Gaza children more than just numbers, Canadian UNICEF worker says. Article continued below. Later, witnesses reported that Israeli warplanes dropped 4 bombs on an unfinished building near a Hamas police and security compound and adjacent to a public park in Gaza City, reducing the old structure to rubble. Gaza's health ministry said 2 teenagers were killed in the strike on the 4-story building and 10 others injured. It marked the first casualties of the day. Striking in the heart of Gaza City is typically only seen during full-blown conflicts like the 2014 war and could signal that a further escalation may be in store. The Israeli military had no immediate reaction to that strike but said it had targeted a separate high-rise building in the northern Gaza Strip that it said was used as a Hamas urban warfare training facility. It said a tunnel was dug under the building. Shortly after, Israeli medical officials said 3 Israelis were wounded from a rocket that landed on a house in southern Israel. It said paramedics in the southern city of Daraa were treating a 52-year-old man with a chest wound, a 17-year-old girl with a face wound and a 20-year-old woman with injuries to her limbs. Sirens wailed overnight and throughout most of the day Saturday in southern Israel as rockets and mortars were launched from Gaza amid the Israeli airstrikes. The military said it identified about 60 launches of rockets and mortars from Gaza toward Israeli territory, of which about 10 were intercepted by the Iron Dome aerial defense system. As a precaution, the military shut down a popular beach in southern Israel and placed limitations on gatherings of large crowds. Israeli police says 4 of the projectiles caused damage. With Israel focused on rising tension along its northern border in its efforts to prevent Iran from establishing a permanent military foothold in post-Civil War Syria, it has been wary of escalating hostilities in Gaza. But Netanyahu has also come under pressure to act from southern Israeli communities, who have once again found themselves under rocket fire from Gaza. In addition to contending with the daily field fires, we are ready to operate simultaneously in different theaters, Conrick said, referring to Syria and Gaza. It will be challenging to fight on more than one border, but it is something we can do and are prepared to do. Israel's military chief visited the border area for briefings, and the Security Cabinet, Israel's top decision-making body, is expected to convene Sunday to discuss further actions. On Friday, thousands of Palestinians gathered near the Gaza border for their near-weekly protest. A 15-year-old Palestinian who tried to climb over the fence into Israel was shot dead. Later, the military said an Israeli officer was moderately wounded by a grenade thrown at him. Gaza's health ministry said Saturday that a 20-year-old struck by gunfire Friday during the protests in the southern Gaza Strip had also died of his wounds. In a statement, the military said Hamas activities violate Israeli sovereignty, endanger Israeli civilians, and sabotage Israel's humanitarian efforts that aim to help Gazan civilians. In a relatively rare admission, Hamas said it fired the rockets to deter Israel from further action. Most of the recent rockets from Gaza have been fired by smaller factions, but Hamas spokesman Fawzi Barham said it was an immediate response that was meant to deliver the message. The military said its jets targeted 2 Hamas tunnels as well as other military compounds, including those involved in the production of the kites and balloons. It said the Hamas battalion headquarters in northern Gaza was completely destroyed, and footage it released showed a series of large explosions that left a gaping hole in the ground.